15 portfolio companies, we own 14.3% on average, but quite different ownership stakes, as you will see. We were a little bit different from some investors in that we can typically invest fairly small stakes and then actually try to increase them as the companies go well. We use pre-valued options and other tools to do this. And this number might be worth mentioning as well. It's actually bigger than it was a year ago. We've been able to increase our ownership and even keep it in companies that have gone really well. And it's of course one of the challenges of being an early stage investor that you might get diluted over the growth journey. But this is something that we have partly through legwork, helping the companies to raise funding, getting some ownership through that, and partly through options and similar been able to do. This is how our companies have grown over the last 4 years. Quite remarkable growth in revenues. And it should be mentioned that this is not including Nocart's $200 million order that we announced this year. 150% 2016. And I got on the company in 2014. And at that point, our whole combined portfolio didn't even have 5 million euro in revenue. Now we have 2 companies crossing 10 million euro revenue mark individually. So it's been a really good growth journey, and we see no signs of this slowing down. Let's see if I can get this to my... Well, this is simply to show you that we have Energize and Nuka in our portfolio. Typically I talk a lot about them, but I will not today. I will dig into the companies, however, and I'll try to give you an overview of some of them. Nocart, you may have heard of if you are a shareholder in Cleantech Invest or if you're following us. They do these power management units that are the heart and brain of a renewable energy system. And they started with these, but over the years they have grown into a turnkey supplier of distributed renewable energy. Basically, you can plug in any type of renewable energy source that you want into these and then turn it into grid quality electricity. Still, some 1.1 billion people in the world lack access to electricity in any shape or form, and even more lack access to grid quality electricity. So this is a huge market, and a lot of it is happening in Africa right now. This is the revenue of Nocart and the profit in 2016. The company has actually 3- or 4-folded revenues every year since they started 4 years ago, and profitably. I think it was like 0.6 million euro last year, so now it's 3.4 million euro in profit actually this year. A very impressive growth journey, I would say. We raised 5 million euro to them in 2016, partly to be ready for this big order that they then got from Zambia. Swap.com, I'm used to saying that this is a 1 football field, but it's actually now a 3 football fields large fulfillment center outside of Chicago in the US. It's now US largest second-hand online shop, or fulfillment center as it's called in America. So it works very simple. Customers can grab anything from their garage or wherever, all kinds of second-hand items. They put it in a box, sends it into Swap, who sorts them, takes pictures, prices it, and puts it all up on swap.com, where there is now more than 2 million second-hand items for sale. And this is not what you might imagine as seeing a second-hand shop. It's more of it more looks like an electronics factory if you go there. It's really a logistics dream how it's all set up. I worked there for a day and tried all the stations, and well, it's a high-tech business to run this. $20 million, that's the annualized sales. And maybe to explain that, that's if you take the last month sales and assume that this goes flat for 2 years, or for 1 year, the next 12 months, then they would end up in $20 million. We are a little bit secretive of their revenues now for competitive reasons, but this is how we can state it. So filtration, this is maybe what you would more typically think of as an environmental technology company. They filter fine particles, so 1/100th of 1 hair is what they can filter out. This means that you can recirculate water, typically processed water or similar in industries. Otherwise you clog up the filters, you have to stop the process to clean the filters. They can do it continuously. And it's an ultrasound-based innovation, so they actually use ultrasound to clean the filters and then backflush the residue out. They just opened a US office and they just got their first volume order of 3 units, and this is a big step for a company like this. These 11 projects have been somewhat trial project with the customer, although they have been sold. Getting a volume order of 3 projects or systems is a completely different ballgame. This is something that a lot of you probably have not seen before. This is from the inside of a gas turbine. So these are the blades. And what happens in gas turbines is that these will attract fouling over time. So the intake air into these gas turbines means that there are also particles coming in. What Eagle filters have done is a high efficiency particle filter that works in 3 steps and cleans the intake air to gas turbines. And there's a lot more electricity to be made from this. They save in the sense that you can get more kilowatt hours out since these turbines run cleaner. But they also save since there's less downtime. Otherwise you have to stop these turbines and actually clean them. And then you have a lot of downtime as well. So they are able to give more than 9% or up to 9% more power from a gas turbine when they install their filters. This is a company where we recently invested more, and we're now at 28% ownership, and I think we have an option to go up to 40% already preset in value. I don't know how I'm pushing this when it's going right, but somehow I'm doing it. This is a very different company from most clean tech companies when you think about it, I think. It has no hardware at all. Rescue Club is an app. So some 15-20% of all restaurant meals are actually thrown away. I used to run a cafe, so I've carried a lot of perfectly good meals to the waste bin. Rescue Club makes use of this leftover meals. It's an app that lets restaurant owners upload meals and users buy them. They grab some 25% in between, and it's grown really, really well since we invested. This is the kind of hockey stick that you would like to show at every presentation at least once. But this is actually what has happened in that company over the year. We invested somewhere in May 2016. Food sales, if you take the same run rate example as I did with Swap, I think they're now at 1.1 million actually sold lunches over a yearly revenue rate. Registered users and active restaurants have grown similarly. I'll give you a quick overview of what we've done. Fundraising, we raised some almost 50 million euro to our companies last year, and some 4 or 5 million euro to ourselves. Acceleration has been a lot of our focus, trying to get the companies to grow even faster. We have added resources to them. We've even exchanged CEOs. Communication and internationalization. Well, let me show this slide. Since we're here today, and I mentioned the live stream, we did a similar after-work event in Helsinki, also as a way of communicating with our shareholders, reaching some more investors. And that number there was actually 4,500 people who have watched this event live on Facebook since we did it. We brought in some Hollywood stars. This is a writer and a producer from Hollywood actually who are there talking with us as well. And then we highlighted our portfolio firms. So we do a lot in communication. And we've started pop-up offices in different places of the world. And this is the reason why. Some of our companies have their target markets. They typically go to where the need for their product is biggest. And that tends to be not in the Nordics. We invest in the Nordics, but typically they go international early. So we have put up offices ourselves. I've been in Berlin for half a year. Last year is in Los Angeles, and we are looking at setting up one in Shanghai. And this is actually a first for this, what I will show now. We have calculated for the first time our own impact, or the impact that our companies are having. I mentioned our purpose, and of course we need to see how we are actually doing in that sense. So we have started by measuring the CO2 impact of 6 of our companies and the water impact of 2 of them for the first time. And this is what it turns into. I put Swap and Eagle filters there under the CO2 impact because they are the main contributors to it. So what we did is we looked at their revenue, so only real revenue and really installed products over the last year. And then we looked what has happened with the customers when they install these products. And of course, a lot of CO2 savings is typically the result. And then we tried to compare that to the status quo if they had not been installed. in the case of Eagle filters. In swap.com it gets a little bit even more complicated because you have to actually look and see the whole environmental burden of a new t-shirt, for example, as compared to someone buying it from Swap. Water saving, similar process, of course. We look at, for example, in Helsinki, Sophie Filtration is saving a couple of swimming pools for Fortum every week, I think, by letting the district heating water circulate using their filters. And we looked at that for Swap as well with water use. These numbers matter more if you compare them to something. So we took some numbers. We took Finnish cars, Swedish households. So this is actually the energy use of 17,000 Swedish households, not individuals, but actual households. And as I mentioned, Eagle, it's actually also the same. They save the same amount of carbon as is released by their home city of Kotka each year. And then I did the CO2 per euro of sales, how much they're actually doing. I like the Olympic-sized swimming pool one best myself. And that was it. That was my last slide. This is our goal till 2017. I think we're well on our way of reaching it. I am open for questions, but I would actually like to start by bringing, since we have Lassi Noponen here as the chairman of Cleantech Invest, I would like to bring you up as well on stage. If you grab the mic first. And I will actually start by giving you some questions. I saved some of my presentation time for that. These pop-up offices mean not only that we get out and increase our network. We have added actually owners from Germany to Energize, and Lassi has helped finding investors who have invested into Cleantech Invest from California, and he's helping find distribution partners for some of our portfolio companies. But we also get some knowledge actually of how things are going on these markets. So allow me to ask you, Lassi. I think that the policy risk has clearly shifted to the fossil side of the table, but how would you see it from the US angle? I know a lot of people are interested in how Trump is affecting this whole market, and how is this whole policy versus market growth looking from your angle?
Yeah, okay. I think it's a really important question, and a lot of people are like in Europe a little bit afraid of this Trump regime's policies. Will that like turn back the clock? And I think it's really interesting to be in California, and I think a couple of things come out, and one is that the role of policy on a federal level has like diminished. The market is in many shapes the instrument that drives the market. California shows no signs of going back at all, and it's just so much that one president in the United States can do, even if he can dominate their airwaves. It's like there is this theory of history that is history driven by great leaders, or is it created by shifts in societal conditions? And clearly we have exceeded the threshold where the clean tech transformation is happening on market-based drivers. And even the fact that multinationals are moving into the space, it's dictated not by, in my opinion, by some legislation, but rather what their ultimate consumers demand. So the consumers and the voters, they have the power. Politicians like to oftentimes present themselves as the leaders, but they are actually the followers who will do what the voters and consumers want. And I think we are doing this at a very interesting time. It may be difficult sometimes to see when you're in the eye of the hurricane how big tectonic plates are shifting in terms of the transformation. The other thing that you see, maybe if this was the policy versus market, is that it's more like regions versus states or governments. You know, in the US, California is a leader and continues to be. I think in Europe you see that the Northern Europe is doing really well, and it's a very powerful instrument in clean tech shift, whereas Southern Europe not so much. And I think, the fact that we're having this here in Stockholm today, Stockholm is emerging as the financing hub for growth companies, not only in clean tech, but this is an interesting change that the role of the nation states is diminishing versus regions that are more ad hoc to a task.
I agree. It's interesting. We have Ennosai's listing here, a Finnish company doing business in China, listing in Stockholm. But Stockholm is really becoming a financial center for all of Europe when it comes to startup listings, I would say. Well, interesting. Would you say even that Trump might even be a factor to gather against for some of these policies?
Totally. It is happening that the fact that Trump's regime is seen as such a negative force, and you may debate if it is or if it isn't, but it's clearly galvanizing younger generation and people who have not been politically active it's been a wake-up call that, okay, bad things can happen unless we do something. So I think history will show that this is actually a good a turning point in some senses if we survive the climate change. If the temperature doesn't go up too much.
Well, an optimistic view of the Trump regime, you could say, for a change.
Well, not optimistic, but not entirely negative. You know, it's a catalyst for change also.
Well, I'll do one more question to you, and then you can actually stay on if someone has a more question. Valuations in terms of if you compare US and California to Europe in terms of value, I can imagine some of you might be interested in that. How different is it? What do you see?
Well, it's very different. You know, now we are a listed firm, so what can we say? You know, one of the reasons we started this pop-up activity is that we had an hypothesis that if Cleantech Invest was a California-based firm and all the portfolio firms were there, we would be valued 4 or 6 times what we are. Who knows? But the valuations of firms are very much higher. But of course, the market is unified and it's a different world. But one of the reasons why Cleantech Invest is doing this pop-upping is to try to tap into this, help these companies get to this market and tap into these valuations. But I would say that there's this talk about cleantech bubble. I think, you know, going back to my point about being in the eye of the hurricane is that the shift, the transformation into renewable energy and clean tech is so big that the sector is not a bubble. Sector change, this will continue for a long time. But of course, within the sector, you have assets that can be overvalued. And that's one of the reasons why Cleantech Invest has this portfolio strategy. I don't know. I would just say that, you know, I would, you know, many of you are our shareholders and hopefully those who are not will be, but it's difficult for me to think of how something like Cleantech Invest wouldn't be part of a reasonable, diversified share portfolio at this day and age.
Well, there you have it. Any more questions? For me or Lassi, actually, since he's up here. Yeah, du kan bara... Bra. I'll repeat it in English, yeah.
Jag tänkte lite grann på era 2 största innehav rent penningmässigt, Swap och Nocart. Det är ju det som styr aktieutvecklingen framöver. Om du kan kommentera lite om Nocarts planer på finns det en plan på en börsnotering där? Och vad är planerna för Swap? Det vore intressant att synliggöra lite värden där, för det vore ju kanske intressant.
Well, I'll just repeat the question in English, also for our live stream. So the question is basically what our plans are, or what Nocart and Swap's plans are when it comes to growth and potential listings going ahead. Well, I will try to answer this as thoroughly as I can without giving away any inside information, which is always tricky. Well, for Nocart, let me first say that they have initiated offices in several African countries and also in several other places. And it really should be stated that this order that they recently gotten, however big it is only one order, and it is only in one African country. So of course they have a huge pipeline, and we see a lot more places where this is growing and where they can potentially get new orders. I think that's worth mentioning when they have released such a huge order. When it comes to listing, we have not launched any listings plans for Nocart, and I cannot say that we will either in the near future. Of course, we don't rule it out either. When it comes to Swap, same thing. I cannot, unfortunately, say that they will be listed. It is, however, definitely one of the potential trajectories for that company. It is a company that would be very suitable, both on the stock exchange here in Sweden, because of the knowledge of the retail investors here. They understand the retail industry. We have had H&M listings and other clothing companies here. It would be greatly understood here. We also have a good knowledge of the second-hand market in Stockholm. But of course, a potential listing on the Nasdaq would be valued a lot higher. So that's sort of a trade-off in the potential listing of that company. Well, we have, of course, thought about it a bit, as you can hear from the answer. I don't know if you want to add something, maybe.
Yeah, maybe I could add just that I think we have said about swap that an IPO in America is like the base case option, the timing to be seen. But I will say this about NoCart, because I sit in the board of NoCart, and I just, on my way here today, I had a chat with the CEO, who is back from Zambia, having met the president there.
Yeah.
And we have published that they have a pipeline of something like €1 billion, and the CEO just reported back that everything is going as planned, working on multiple big deals, exactly as has been planned. So it's looking really good.
More questions?
But these African countries need to finance any deal. Aren't you afraid that they might stumble before they can solve that problem?
Well, that's a good question. And in reality, raising funding for these projects that then order the equipment from NoCat is probably the biggest bottleneck for NoCat in getting more orders, and has been also in the entire growth of the company. That tends to be the bottleneck. And it is a crucial skill of the team, and I would say of Vesa in particular, to actually make sure he finds the projects that have that funding, because otherwise you can spend a lot of resources on the wrong projects, and then they will typically not get funded. But the whole funding mechanisms of these projects it's almost a science, but it's almost like starting a startup and getting that funded, because it's typically a consortia of actors who are funding the projects. So typically it's a combination of, it can be banks from London, it can be NGOs, and it's typically a consortia who guarantees then the payment for NoCart when they take on a project. And a fair chunk of that is actually prepaid before any equipment is even ordered. So there is a process for going through who stands behind that project money, making sure you get it before you actually take any risk in the project. Having said that, these projects in Africa, it's not like things can happen. Of course, they can be delayed and postponed, both in payment and in implementation. We are aware of that. So one of the reasons why we did this €5 million funding round to NoCart, despite them being actually quite profitable, is also to have some sort of war chest for delays in the future. I don't know if that answers it completely.
If I just comment that, of course, the company has to look into this, to get paid basically before it spends the money. I would just say that I'm asked this always in Finland. Are you not afraid of working in Africa? In these markets, and I said, well, no, I'm more worried about the EU and Finnish market, because in Africa we are looking at enormous growth, and it's just a technicality, that has to be managed to get paid. But the growth is there. So.
The growth is there in this off-grid market enough, and more project money from Europe and even US and other places actually looking to this whole rural electrification in Africa to deploy money. So there is also more money flowing in to these projects.
An interesting thing maybe to add to that is that it was a surprise to me, but Nordic countries have like an upper hand in providing this kind of an infrastructure technology to Africa because of the neutral nature of the countries. The local African countries, they are a little bit worried about dealing with the Americans or even the Germans, because they feel that they have a colonialistic attitude, let alone China, that has ruined its reputation. So even if from some small company from Finland, it looks that it can grow to be a really big actor, because it comes from the right place.
Vi kör den också, absolut.
Jag tänkte återigen prata lite om NoCart. Dels, det är ett så otroligt stort det är så betydande del av er portfölj. Så nästa gång kanske det hade varit intressant om även de hade varit här. Så en presentation med Nordcart vore intressant, även med swap. Bra grej att tänka på till nästa gång.
Ja.
Sen tänkte jag på Nordcart där, den här jätteorden som offentliggjordes där runt sommar. Hur pipelinen är stor, men är det liksom ett undantag att det kan bli sådana stora affärer? Eller ser vi fler sådana komma?
That's another leading question. So the question in English is if we see more deals of the similar size coming into Nordcart. And then, of course, you also wanted to have Nordcart and swap here. Well, let me first say also that we have a bunch of ownership in companies that are growing fairly fast. So although Nordcart is a big holding for us, there are quite a few that are becoming increasingly valuable. I would also say that, yes, typically the deals are getting bigger and bigger for Nordcart. If they are exactly in the same size, I don't want to say, but they are actually increasing in size on average. That much we can say. I don't know if we can say much more.
No, the pipeline is huge and deal size varies, but big. But I would comment the other question that I remember vividly when we made the investment into Nordcart. It was nothing. It was the first investment it started, and we like to see cleantech invest as a conveyor belt that produces this kind of success stories, and therefore we don't really want to focus too much on Nordcart. This just happens to be at the moment the most valuable asset.